Hey guys, welcome back to Alleviated Soul. So today is the part 2 of the last chapter, Lord Kapila, the son of Kardama Muni and Devahūti, Canto 3. Lord Brahma then came to Kardama's ashrama accompanied by the great demigods and sages. After worshipping the Supreme Lord in great happiness, Lord Brahma said to Kardama, "My dear son, you have accepted my instructions without duplicity and have thus shown them proper respect. By acting in this way, you have honored me greatly, and in fact, all sons should render service to their father just like this. My dear Kardama, all your daughters are certainly very chaste, and so please give them today to the foremost of sages after duly considering their temperaments." The Supreme Lord has now appeared as an incarnation, and this form of Kapila Muni will be characterized by his golden hair, lotus eyes, and feet that bear the marks of the lotus flower. Lord Brahma then said to Devahūti, "My dear daughter of Manu, the Supreme Lord is now within your womb. After dispelling your doubts, which have arisen due to ignorance, he will travel all over the world as the foremost of perfected souls." Having thus spoken, Lord Brahma returned to his own abode, accompanied by the four Kumaras and Narada, who are lifelong brahmacharis. As ordered by Brahma, Kardama handed over Kala to Marichi, Anusuya to Adri, Shraddha to Angira, Havirbhu to Pulastya, Gati to Pulaha, Kriya to Kratu, Khyati to Bhragu, Arundhati to Vasishtha, and Shanti to Atharva. These great sages then took permission to leave from Kardama and joyfully departed for their own ashramas. Thereafter, Lord Kapila appeared as the son of Devahūti, and Kardama approached him in a secluded place. After offering his obeisances, the great sage said, "My dear Lord, you have appeared in my home for the purpose of disseminating transcendental knowledge. Because you are the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is full of all opulence, I surrender unto your lotus feet. My Lord, now that I have fulfilled my debt to my father and all my desires have been fulfilled, I wish to accept the renounced order of life and wander over the earth fully absorbed in thinking of you within my heart." Because the Lord had personally appeared in Kardama's house, it is striking that the sage wanted to renounce family life so that he could fully engage in remembering him. Since God was personally present, why should he leave home? Kardama actually left home just to set the example of following the Vedic injunctions, which declare that after 50 years of age, one must accept the order of Vanaprastha or Sannyasa. Lord Kapila replied, "O Muni, as promised by me previously, I have now appeared as your son to preach the philosophy of Sankhya, which has been forgotten due to the passage of time. You have my permission to depart as you desire. By thus surrendering all your activities unto me, you will ultimately conquer death. I will instruct my mother so that she can also attain perfection in self-realization and thus gain a life of fearlessness. Kardama circumambulated his son, and with a pure and pacified mind, he left home at once and entered the forest. Following the vow of Mauna, so that he could exclusively meditate upon the Supreme Lord, Kardama wandered over the earth without a companion and devoid of any relationship with fire or shelter. In this way, he became completely freed from all material affection and situated in pure devotional service to the Lord. By dint of his exalted consciousness, he could see the Supreme Lord seated in everyone's heart, and he could also see that everything was existing in him, the Supreme Soul. Ultimately, Kardama gave up his temporary form and traversed the path that goes back home, back to Godhead. Meanwhile, after the departure of Kardama, Lord Kapila remained with his mother at Bindu Sarovar. One day, when she remembered what Lord Brahma had previously assured her, Devahūti approached her son as he was sitting at leisure in a secluded place. Desiring to free herself from the material condition of life, Devahūti spoke to Lord Kapila. I am very tired of the disturbances caused by my material senses, and because of my engagement in sense gratification, I have fallen into an abyss of ignorance. My Lord, I know that you are the only means for getting out of this darkness, for you are my transcendental eye that I have received after many, many births. You are the Supreme Lord and have appeared to dissipate the darkness of ignorance within the universe. I have been engaged by your external potency in the bodily conception of life, and I now beg you to dispel that great delusion. I have taken shelter of your lotus feet, for you are the axe that can cut down the tree of material existence. After hearing his mother's uncontaminated desire for self-realization, Lord Kapila thanked her within himself. Then, while smiling magnanimously, he replied, O most pious mother, I shall now explain to you the ancient system of yoga that establishes the relationship between the individual soul and the Supreme Lord. When one's consciousness is attracted by the three modes of material nature, conditional life begins. When that same consciousness becomes attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that one is liberated from the material entanglement. At this time, the soul can see himself to be transcendental to material existence, self-effulgent and never fragmented, although very minute in size. By seeing everything in the right perspective, one becomes indifferent to material existence, and thus the influence of material nature acts less powerfully upon him. This perfection of yoga can only be attained by the practice of devotional service to the Lord, Bhakti Yoga, and therefore it is the only truly auspicious path. Everyone knows that material attachment causes the greatest entanglement of the soul. But that same attachment, when applied to the pure devotees, opens the door to liberation. Such sadhus are tolerant, merciful, and friendly toward all living entities. They have no enemies, they are peaceful, they abide by the regulations of Shastra, and indeed all their characteristics are sublime. Due to constantly chanting and hearing about me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the sadhus do not suffer from material miseries, because their thoughts are always absorbed in me. By association with pure devotees, one's ears and heart become completely satisfied while hearing Krishna Katha. This higher taste enables one to gradually become attracted to me in full faith and devotion. Due to this attraction, the devotee gains distaste for mundane sense gratification, and by becoming fixed in devotional service, he can achieve my association in this very life. Devahūti said, "My dear son, I am, after all, a woman, and so it is very difficult for me to understand the absolute truth due to possessing lesser intelligence. But if you kindly explain to me how I can engage in devotional service in such a way that I can easily attain your lotus feet, then I will surely understand it." Being born from her body, Lord Kapila was already compassionate toward Devahūti, and after hearing this statement, he became even more so. The Lord then described the Sankhya system of philosophy, which is a combination of devotional service and mystic realization. The culmination of this process is given as follows. When the mind is perfectly purified by the practice of yoga, one should concentrate on the tip of his nose with half-closed eyes and see the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead within. The Lord has a cheerful, lotus-like countenance which is adorned with reddish eyes. He wears shining yellow cloth. On his chest is the curl of white hair known as Shrivatsa, and around his neck hangs the brilliant Also, around his neck is a garland of forest flowers surrounded by humming bees, and he is further adorned with a pearl necklace, crown, and pairs of armlets, bracelets, and anklets. While standing upon the lotus of the devotee's heart, the Lord is most charming to look at, and his serene demeanor gladdens the eyes and souls of all who are fortunate enough to behold him. He is ever youthful and always eager to bestow his blessings upon his devotees. While fixing his mind upon the Lord's eternal form, the yogi should not see his body in its entirety, but should view each individual limb separately. The devotee should first concentrate his mind upon the Lord's lotus feet, which are adorned with the marks of a thunderbolt, goat, banner, and lotus. The Lord's lotus feet with their splendorous ruby nails act like thunderbolts that shatter the mountain of sin stored in the mind of the meditating devotee. For this reason, one should concentrate his mind upon the lotus feet of the Lord for a long time. The yogi should then meditate upon the activities of Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, who is always very carefully massaging the Lord's legs and thighs. Next, the devotee should meditate upon the Lord's thighs, which are the storehouse of all energies. Then he should contemplate the Lord's rounded hips, which are encircled by a nice sash. The yogi should thereafter meditate upon the Lord's moon-like navel, from which the entire universe has sprung. Next, the yogi should concentrate his mind upon the Lord's nipples, which resemble a pair of exquisite emeralds. Then he should concentrate upon the Lord's chest, which is the abode of the goddess Mahalakshmi, and which is the source of all transcendental pleasure for the mind and eyes. Thereafter, the devotee should fix his mind upon the Lord's neck, which enhances the beauty of the Kaustubha gem that hangs down to his chest. The yogi can then meditate upon the Lord's forearms, which are the source of all the powers by which the demigods control the various functions of material nature. Next, the yogi can contemplate the Lord's ornaments, which were polished by Mount Mandara as it revolved during the churning of the milk ocean. The devotee should then contemplate the Sudarshana Chakra, which has 1000 spokes and is dazzlingly effulgent. He can next concentrate his mind upon the Lord's conch, shell, and Kaumudaki club, which is smeared with the blood of the demons. One should also meditate upon his garland, which is always surrounded by buzzing bumblebees, and the pearl necklace around his neck, which is considered to be the pure living entities that are always engaged in his service. The devotee should next meditate upon the lotus-like face of the Lord. His nose is prominent, and the glittering of his alligator-shaped earrings illuminates his crystal clear cheeks. The Lord's beautiful face is adorned with curly black hair and decorated by lotus petal eyes and dancing eyebrows. Thereafter, the yogi should meditate with full devotion upon the compassionate glances that the Lord frequently casts, for they soothe the most fearful miseries of material life. Those glances, which are accompanied by smiles of love, are full of abundant mercy. The yogi should meditate upon the benevolent smile of the Lord, for it dries up the ocean of tears that is caused by intense grief. He should also meditate upon the Lord's arched eyebrows, because they charm the god of sex for the welfare of the sages. Then, with a heart filled with love and devotion, the devotee should think of the laughter of Lord Vishnu, which is extremely captivating. When the Lord laughs, his small teeth, which resemble jasmine buds, made rosy by the splendor of his lips, become visible. Once having devoted his mind to this vision, the yogi should no longer desire to see anything else. By following this process of meditation, the yogi gradually develops pure attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The hair on his body stands erect due to excessive joy, and he is constantly bathed in the stream of tears brought about by his intense love for the Lord. The body of such a liberated yogi, who is absorbed in samadhi, is taken care of by the Supreme Lord Himself. Thus, the yogi no longer even understands how the body is moving, or if he does, he considers its activities to be like the activities of a body in a dream. Devahūti said, "My dear Lord, please describe in detail the continual process of birth and death, for by hearing of such calamities, we may become detached from the activities of this material world." In response, Lord Kapila described the movements of the living entities and the results of adverse fruitive activities. Just as a mass of clouds cannot understand the powerful influence of the wind that carries it, so a person in material consciousness cannot understand how he is being carried by the powerful time factor. Whatever such a materialist produces with great pain and labor for the purpose of achieving so-called happiness is destroyed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the time factor, and thus he laments. He foolishly takes his body and bodily relations to be permanent, and whatever species he appears in, he becomes satisfied with that condition and thus is unwilling to give up his body even when in hell. Such satisfaction with one's standard of life is due to a deep-rooted attraction for the body, wife, children, and the rest. Although burning with anxiety, such a fool performs mischievous acts to maintain his family while keeping within his heart a hope that is never to be fulfilled. He gives his heart and senses to a woman who falsely charms him with Maya, and thus he enjoys her embraces and talks in a solitary place. The attached householder is similarly enchanted by the sweet words of his small children, and so he remains in family life, which is full of politics and diplomacy. While trying to counteract the miseries of life, he secures money by lying, cheating, and committing violence. Although he employs his income in the service of his family, the attached householder eats only a small portion of the food purchased and then goes to hell for those who he earned money by sinful means. After suffering repeated failures in business, a man will finally beg, borrow, or steal money so that he can go on maintaining his family and social position. If unsuccessful, however, he always thinks of his failure, and thus, due to intense grief and anxiety, he becomes bereft of all beauty. Upon seeing him unable to support them properly, a man's wife and other dependents do not treat him as respectfully as before, just as miserly farmers neglect their old and worn out oxen, and yet, although those who he formerly supported now neglectfully maintain him, the foolish family man does not become averse to household life. Finally, after becoming deformed by the influence of old age, he prepares to meet his death. While remaining at home and accepting whatever remnants of food are given to him, just like a pet dog, he becomes afflicted with numerous diseases. Due to loss of appetite, he can only eat a small morsel of food, and because of invalidity, he bulge from their sockets because of the pressure of air from within and because of the congestion of mucus. He has difficulty breathing and thus makes a peculiar sound while inhaling and exhaling. In this way, he finally comes under the clutches of death, and so he lies down surrounded by his lamenting relatives. Although he wants to impart some final instructions to his family members, he no longer has the power of speech, and thus he dies a frustrated man, practically bereft of consciousness due to the great pain. At the time of death, he sees the Yamadutas wrathfully come before him, and thus in great fear he passes stool and urine. Just as the police arrest a criminal, the Yamadutas take away a man who has engaged in sinful sense gratification. After binding him around the neck with a strong rope, they cover his subtle body so that he may undergo severe punishment. While being carried away by the Yamadutas, he trembles in their hands, and as he remembers the sinful activities of his past life, he becomes terribly distressed. Under the scorching sun, he has to pass along roads of hot sand while forest fires rage on both sides. While dogs continually bite him, the Yamadutas whip his back when he becomes too tired to walk. Although greatly afflicted by hunger and thirst, the sinful person finds no drinking water or resting place along the road. Sometimes he falls unconscious due to fatigue, and yet he is forced by the Yamadutas to get up and continue walking. But because all this is enacted on the subtle platform, he passes 99,000 yogatnas in just 2 or 3 minutes. After being brought into the presence of Yamaraja, the sinful person is immediately engaged in the torturous punishments he is destined to suffer. He may be placed in the midst of burning wood so that his limbs are set on fire. He may have to eat his own flesh or have it eaten by others. Dogs and vultures may tear out his intestines, although he remains alive to see it. And snakes, scorpions, spiders, or mosquitoes may torment him. Sometimes his limbs may be cut off or torn apart by elephants. He may be thrown from hilltops, confined within a cave, or kept underwater. Especially those persons whose lives were built around illicit sex indulgence are put into very miserable conditions in the hells known as Tamisra, Andhatamisra, and Raurava. After quitting his body, the sinful man goes to the darkest regions of hell, and the wealth he acquired by envying others is the passage money by which he leaves this world. After suffering in hell, one has to pass through the lower forms of life in a regular order so as to become purged of his sins and thus once again be reborn as a human being upon the earth. Under the supervision of the Supreme Lord, according to his karma, the living entity is put into a particle of male semen and then injected into the mother's womb so that he can assume a particular type of body. On the first night, the semen and ovum mix, and by the fifth day, the mixture ferments into a bubble. By the 10th day, it develops into a small lump of flesh, and at the end of 1 month, the head is formed. At the end of 2 months, the fingers, toes, hair, bones, and skin appear, as well as the 9 outlets. Within 4 months, the 7 essential ingredients of the body come into being: skin, blood, flesh, fat, bone, marrow, and semen. At the end of 5 months, hunger and thirst are felt, and by the end of 6 months, the fetus begins to move on the right side of the abdomen if a male and on the left side of a female, and on the left side if a female. The fetus grows by receiving nutrition from the food and drink that are consumed by the mother and passed on through the umbilical cord. All the while, the child remains in an abominable place, which is the breeding ground for all kinds of worms due to the presence of stool and urine. Since his tender body is bitten all over by these hungry worms, the child suffers terribly and thus loses consciousness from moment to moment. Because the mother eats food that is too bitter, pungent, sour, or salty, the child suffers almost unbearable pain. While placed within the amnion and surrounded by the mother's intestine, the child remains lying with his head turned toward his belly so that his back and neck are arched like a bow. In this way, he is caged without any freedom and is pushed downward by the air that presses against him during the week prior to delivery. If he is fortunate, the child is given an opportunity to remember all the troubles he had endured during his previous 100 births, and thus he laments grievously. Having developed unconsciousness From the 7th month, the child begins praying to the Lord with folded hands. My dear Lord, I am taking shelter of you, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because you have put me into this miserable condition of life, you can also give me relief if you so desire. Because of forgetting my relationship with you, O Lord, I have been put under the control of the material nature, forcing me to undergo a hard struggle for existence while on the path of repeated birth and death. Because Maya is so strong, without your mercy, I will not be able to engage in your transcendental loving service, and therefore I am surrendering unto you. I have fallen into a pool of blood, stool, and urine within my mother's womb, and her gastric fire is scorching my body. Being very anxious to get out of here, I have been counting the days and wondering, O my Lord, when shall I, a wretched soul, become released from this confinement? My dear Lord, by your mercy, I have come to my senses, although only 10 months old, and thus there is no way for me to properly express my gratitude. By your grace, I have received this human body, which affords the facility for understanding my relationship with you. Although I am in such a miserable condition, I have now come to my clear consciousness. I think that it is better for me to remain here and meditate upon your lotus feet rather than come out of the womb and become captured by your external energy, for that will make me forget everything. As the child is thus worshipping the Lord, the wind that helps parturition begins propelling him downward, face first, so that he may be born. After being suddenly pushed by that wind, he comes out of the womb head downward with great difficulty, and due to the severe agony, he is breathless and deprived of memory. Smeared all over with blood and stool, the child cries as he is given to the care of persons who cannot understand his wants. Since he is unable to refuse what is given to him, he falls into undesirable circumstances. Being made to lay down on a bed infested with germs, the poor child cannot even scratch his body to get relief from the itching sensation. In that helpless condition, mosquitoes, bugs, and germs bite his tender skin, and thus he cries bitterly. Due to the spell of Maya, he cannot remember the determination to gain salvation he had possessed while within the womb. In this way, he suffers as a baby. Then, later on, when backward in school, he also suffers due to being forced to study when he would rather play. In youth, he has so many desires that he cannot fulfill, and thus he gradually becomes angry and frustrated. In order to vanquish his soul, the young man increases his false prestige and anger, and thereby creates enmity toward similarly lusty people. By such ignorance, he accepts the material body as the self and other non-permanent things as his own. For the sake of his body, he performs so many sinful activities that keep him within the cycle of repeated birth and death. If he associates with sensually minded persons who are simply concerned with the satisfaction of the tongue and genitals, then he certainly takes to the path of unrighteousness and thereafter goes to hell again. Because such companionship makes one devoid of truthfulness, cleanliness, mercy, gravity, good intelligence, shyness, austerity, fame, forgiveness, control of the mind and senses, and future good fortune. One should never associate with a coarse fool who is bereft of the knowledge of self-realization and therefore no better than a dancing dog led around by the hands of a woman. There is no greater bondage than that which results from attachment to women or men who are overly fond of women. Even Lord Brahma became bewildered at the sight of his own daughter, and thus he shamelessly ran after her in the form of a stag when she took the form of a doe. Amongst all the living beings created by Brahma, only Narayana Rishi is immune to attraction for the form of a woman, which is the complete representation of Maya. The strength of Maya in the form of a woman is so great that just by the movement of her eyebrows, a woman can keep the greatest world conquerors under her grip. For this reason, attractive women are declared in Shastra to be the gateway to hell, especially for those who are trying to advance in spiritual life. Devahūti became free from all ignorance after hearing from Lord Kapila. She offered her obeisances and then satisfied her son by offering him the following prayers. Devahūti said, "My dear Lord, although you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, you have taken birth from my womb. Since the entire creation is wound up within your abdomen and the time of devastation, one may wonder how you could appear in this way. It is possible, though, for at the end a banyan leaf and in the form of a small baby, you lick the toe of your lotus foot. In other words, you are perfectly free to act in any way you so desire. My dear Lord, to say nothing of the spiritual advancement of those who see you eye to eye, even those who are born in the family of dog eaters immediately become qualified to perform Vedic sacrifices if they once utter your holy name, chant your glories, offer you obeisances, or even remember you. How glorious are those whose tongues are engaged in chanting your holy name. Even if born in the family of dog eaters, such persons are worshipable. Such chanters of your holy name must have already executed all kinds of austerities, performed fire sacrifices, bathed in all the holy places, studied the Vedas, and achieved all the good manners of the Aryans. Being very satisfied by the words of Devahūti, Lord Kapila replied to her with gravity, "My dear mother, the path of self-realization I have taught you is very easy, and by following if you will very soon become liberated, even while remaining in your present body. In this way, you will ultimately reach me in my eternal transcendental abode." Thereafter, Lord Kapila took permission from his mother and departed, since his mission had been fulfilled. Devahūti remained in Kardama's ashrama, where she practiced deep meditation upon the Lord in devotional service. Due to bathing 3 times daily, her hair gradually turned grey, and because of her severe austerities, her body became very thin. The abode of Kardama, due to its great beauty, was considered to be the flower crown of the river Saraswati. Because of Kardama's mystic power, even the demigods in heaven envied his opulence. Inside Kardama's palace, the couches were made of gold, and the chairs were made of ivory and covered with golden lace cloth. The walls were constructed from first-class marble and inlaid with precious jewels. There was no need for lighting because the rays of those jewels illuminated everything brightly. Surrounding the household of Kardama were very beautiful gardens that were filled with all varieties of flowers and fruit trees. When Devahūti used to enter these gardens to bath in the lotus ponds, the Gandharvas would sing of Kardama's glories. And yet, in spite of possessing such opulence, Devahūti gave up all bodily comforts and wore only torn cloth. Her only regret, which was transcendental, was that her son had left home, and thus she constantly meditated upon him in separation. By following the instructions of Lord Kapila, Devahūti easily gave up all material attachment. By thus attaining purity of heart, she became completely freed from the onslaught of material pangs. meditation, she completely forgot about her material body, just as a person is no longer aware of his body while dreaming. Still, because the Vidyadhara woman who had been created by Kardama were taking care of her needs, and since she was without any anxiety, Devahūti did not become emaciated. Finally, at Kardama's ashrama, which was known as Siddhapada, Devahūti achieved the supreme perfection of life by going back home, back to Godhead, and the material elements of her body melted into water that became the most sacred of rivers. Meanwhile, after leaving his mother, Lord Kapila travelled to the northeast, and as he went along, the Apsaras, Gandharvas, Charanas, and other celestial beings offered him prayers of glorification. Then, after retracing his steps, Lord Kapila came to Ganga Sagara, where the Ganga reaches the Bay of Bengal. At that place, the ocean gave him residence. Even now, Kapila Muni is staying there in the trance of meditation, and he is worshipped by the great acharyas of the Sankhya philosophical system. With this, we come to the end of this chapter. Thank you for listening.